I've got this meeting with Shoshana. Her bat mitzvah's coming up. I've got to go over her Devar Torah. I gotta remember how to put the share screen on so I can look at the text. I kind of feel like such a techno schlemazel. Okay, I think I've got it. Okay.
Jonah, he lived in a whale. Jonah, he lived in a whale. He made his home in that fish's abdomen. Jonah, he lived in a whale. Oh, I love that song.
And who are you? You are certainly not Shoshana Himmelstein.
I'm Jonah.
Oh, like Jonah from the Bible, I suppose.
The very same. And who are you?
Well, I'm a rabbi, Rabbi Siegel.
Rabbi, was that like some kind of prophet?
So, in my age, rabbis do think they speak with the voice of God, but problem is nobody else received the memo. So kind of like a prophet, but not exactly. So Jonah, if that is you, or if that is your name, what are you doing in my video? What are you doing in my Zoom call?
Well, if you read my book, then you would know I get around, get around, I get around, yeah, I get around, ooh.
Please stop.
Boats, running, belly of a great fish. When I say I get around, I get around.
Look, you'll forgive me. I don't have a lot of time for this. I'm working on a sermon. I got a bat mitzvah kid coming over. I'm supposed to be on the call right now. I gotta get my. Let me mute you for a minute. I gotta take a call. Who is this guy? What is going on here? Of all the prophets, let's assume it's Jonah. If all the prophets, I get Jonah. I don't even think the guy's a real prophet. I could have got Isaiah. I could have got Jeremiah. I could have got Ezekiel. These are prophets. They leave terrifying visions, remarkable love of God in Israel, valley of bones, Messiah. They're real prophets. They're trying to save the people from God's wrath. But who do I get? I get Jonah. This guy egged God on to destroy the people, and God had to step in and save the people. Jonah is all story, no prophecy. Okay,
you're not muted.
Oh. Well, that's just a little embarrassing. Dibarnu Dofi.
All story and no prophecy. Well, what a story. I mean, did you see Disney make a movie of Hosea or Amos? No way. But me, I got Pinocchio, and I may not be a real boy, but I am a real prophet for all time.
Yeah, okay, let's go with you. Let's go with that. So, and how are you a prophet for all time?
Let's see. Imagine a country wealthier than all the countries of its time. And this country is full of people who don't value one another, who steal property and land, who use the law to ensure that the poor stay poor and the rich get richer. One might say a land so troubled is worthy of correction or even destruction. Sound familiar? Of course, I'm talking about Nineveh, which had a 1% before people invented percentages. But how relevant does my prophetic story sound to you, Rabbi?
Well, now that you're talking, more than I'm comfortable saying. Here's the question I've always wanted to ask you, Jonah. Did you actually think that you could run away from God? Did you actually think that you could thwart the divine plan?
Whether I could thwart it or not, I wasn't about to help save Nineveh. Whether they deserve destruction for their immorality, their flaunting of wealth, their disregard for the communal good, that's God's decision. But to help God save a people who destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and scattered the 10 lost tribes, that was beyond my capacity for mercy. I stand with my people, no matter how noble the ideals. I'm flying a particular flag in a universal world.
Well, that's impressive, but does that mean you only care about your own people and don't care, you wish destruction on everybody else?
Absolutely not. But you have to be able to recognize who are your enemies and who are your friends. Look, the ship I boarded ended up being full of good, moral people, clearly not from Nineveh. While I was sleeping below, God wreaked havoc on the sea. I recognized that the only way to save them was to jump overboard. But the sailors cared so deeply about my life, they did not want me to risk the leap. but I did it anyway. These were people who did not deserve to die because of me, and so I jumped, and the storm abated, and they sailed on. But the people of Nineveh, I wasn't about to jump off a boat for them. They weren't like those sailors.
Okay, but in the end, you actually couldn't run away from God. You couldn't run away from God's plan. You couldn't run away from God's mission, hence the fish.
Oh, come on, stop. Did you have to bring that up? I have PTSD. I still can't eat sushi. Okay. Let's not talk about it.
A little gefilte fish on Yontif.
I didn't even eat gefilte fish before I got swallowed. That stuff is, look.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Did you care about the people in Nineveh or not?
No.
Did you have something in your
No.
heart?
I didn't. They didn't deserve my care. They deserved the sentence I so loudly proclaimed through the streets. 40 days from now, you will all be destroyed, and Nineveh will be but a whisper of a memory.
Oh, clever. But in the end, they repented. Joke's on you, Jonah. Were you surprised?
Shocked, actually. I so wanted them to continue to be the horrible people that I believed them to be.
So what do you think made the difference?
Humility. I didn't think they were self-aware enough to name and own their sins, to hear me and to actually change. But there was this one Ninevite, the king, who modeled humility. He came off of his throne, he took the crown off his head and put on sackcloth and ashes, and that made all the difference. The act of tshuva, that act of tshuva, could have ruined him, could have ended his rule, but had he not acted, no one would have, and the entire city would have been destroyed. Instead, it brought the people together and he led them into repentance. Who would have thunk it?
You know, Jonah, you actually sound impressed with the Ninevites. Is that true?
No, but I was impressed with the king, and I still am. Those kinds of leaders are rare.
Sadly, in our day as well, I must say. But after everything that happened to you, after everything that you saw in Nineveh, including the king, you were still rooting for God to destroy Nineveh and every Ninevite. You went up to the hill because you were so hoping you were going to get the best seat to see the destruction.
I had the perfect seat from whence to see it all. It even came with shade. I was hoping against hope that God would not be true to the divine attributes, hoping that God would not be Chanun Barachum, kind and forgiving. Yes, that was my hope against those who have been cruel to my people, because 40 days of fasting and sackcloth should not wipe out the guilt of generations of sin.
Well, what did you think was going to happen?
That justice would be served instead of mercy, and my dreams of vengeance over the Ninevites would be fulfilled.
But that's not what happened at all. So what do you think God was hoping for in that moment?
That by climbing up for a better view, I'd have a chance to see the situation through God's eyes and maybe soften into graciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine for God to be gracious and passionate, long forbearing and abundant with kindness. It's just not fine for me. I knew from the start that God was going to show mercy. It's why I caught the first boat to Tarshish in the other direction. So this was God's dream and my nightmare, and I just couldn't watch it. I couldn't zoom out. I could only see what was right in front of me. So when the tree came around...
Oh, you mean the Ricinius plant?
Kikayon to be exact.
A Ricinius plant that gave you shade.
It was a machaya, I tell you.
But God, in God's infinite wisdom, took the plant away from you, and God let it die.
Exactly. I could see only the tree, and when the tree was taken from me, I couldn't see anything at all.
So God put you in your place, Jonah. God outed you, as we say in our day. God showed what a worthless prophet you actually are. Showed you that you cared more about a plant that gave you something that you valued more than the 100,000 souls living in Nineveh. God wanted you to take a moment and get out of your own head, to see the world through God's eyes, to see each of these people that you wanted to erase in a moment, to see that Tselem Elohim inside, the image of God in them. Imagine, Jonah, the people of Nineveh succeed, I mean, you, Jonah, you failed. You are a loser of a prophet.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Aren't we getting a little bit judgy? Cool your rabbinic jets. I'm self-aware. All right, this ain't my first time in therapy. It is true I valued the plant more than the Ninevites. It is true that I lost sight of innocent souls. It is true that my thirst for retribution blinded me completely. You happy?
Well, Jonah, as a rabbi, I do want you to know how much I respect your willingness to look within, to be introspective, and share your feelings with me.
Well, Rabbi, I'm talking to the man in the mirror.
Excuse me, you know about Michael Jackson?
I have been spending enough time in your world, and from where I stand, I would say that you have been blinded by your own versions of Ricinius plans, things that you value more than the lives of others.
For instance?
For instance, political parties that vilify anyone who does not subscribe to their platform. Philosophies whose orthodoxies are so strict that people are willing to let others starve rather than deviate. Religious groups that divide the world between the saved, the ones who subscribe to right think, and those deserving of damnation, or how do you say in your time, cancellation. Nostalgic visions of the past that conveniently skip over the reality of the have-nots and then continue to prevent equality in the present. Visions of the past that are so negative and narrow that there is no vision of the future that does not feel apocalyptic. Leadership which cannot pass a stimulus package in the middle of a pandemic while people all over your country are lining up for food and being evicted from their homes. Parts of your country are literally on fire, and you can't come together to figure out how to put the fires out and what it would take to prevent such disasters in the future because you can't stop arguing about the cause. And you're sermonizing me about not seeing the world through the eyes of God?
The temperature just went up in here just a little bit. I guess this is what it must have felt like to be sitting up on that hill with God and being judged.
How do you suppose God thinks of your world at this moment? And are today's prophets failing God like I did? I admit, I was a failed prophet. God wanted me to be a Jonah, a dove, finding life, finding hope in a flooded world. But I was the dove that did not want to fly, the messenger who forgot the message. But you and your generation can be better than that if you open your eyes and see past the Ricinius plan.
You know, Jonah, I got to tell you that up till this moment, I never thought there was any comparison between my time and yours. Here we spend the entire day of Yom Kippur repeating the Shlosha Esrei Midot, the 13 attributes of God. And we say it as a prayer, imagining God passing before Moses on Mount Sinai saying, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, God, the Lord God is gracious and compassionate. When maybe it shouldn't be read that way. Maybe it's a call to action on our part. After all, what good is God's mercy in this world if it's not being actualized through us? What good is God's compassion if we're not experiencing it from each other? Of what worth is God's kindness if we're not the ones sharing it?
We're getting somewhere.
Wow. I sometimes think that tshuva is the greatest gift of Jewish tradition because it always gives us one more chance, one more opportunity to peer at the world through God's eyes instead of holding on to our own limited vision. Now that I think about it, too often the kikayon, the Ricinius plants in our lives, the things that give us pleasure, receive more of our love than the lives of other people. For generations, we have been called on to decide what we're willing to do to make it right. I hate to admit it, but like the Ninevites, the real power for change is in our hands.
Now you're talking, Rabbi. Now you're talking.
You know, I could never put any of this in a sermon.
Absolutely not. It would never work.
But, you know, if you were still in the prophet business, you could maybe...
If only. But you don't need me. You have my story. Jonah, he lived in a whale. Jonah, he lived in a whale. He made his home in that fish's abdomen. Jonah, he lived.
Hey, Shoshana. Hi. I'd like you to meet. I guess he's gone. Well, let's hear your Devar Torah.